Hello, and welcome to episode 30 of the Women in Manufacturing Association's Hear Her Story podcast. My name is Allison Graylis, and I am the president and founder of the Women in Manufacturing Association and Education Foundation. I was able to catch up in this episode with the Women in Manufacturing Hall of Famer and former Fortune 100 senior executive, Sonita Lontoh. Through her work as a full-time public company board director, she has a very unique insight on how women can search for and join boards of directors. These seats on boards are not easy for women to capture, as only 30% of Fortune 500 board seats are held by women present day. Although this number is an increase, the numbers are still far too low for gender balance on public and private boards. 34% of women-led companies have gender balanced boards, but only 6% of male-led companies have gender-balanced boards. Additionally, only 14% of private board seats are held by women, and more than half, 56% of private boards do not have any gender diversity. Sonita provides us in this episode a first-hand look on how she got involved in boards and how others can as well. In addition, I talked to Sonita about her guiding principles of finding companies that she wants to work with, and her thoughts on getting more women attracted into technology and manufacturing careers. She also talked about her induction into the Women in Manufacturing Hall of Fame and what it has meant to her. We are so proud to feature Sonita on this episode of Hear Her Story. Enjoy the listen. So welcome, Sonita, to the Hear Her Story podcast. I'm so happy to have you join us today.
Oh, thank you for having me today, Allison. Great to join.
Well, it is so nice to reconnect with you and to have the opportunity for you to share your story to our listeners here on this podcast. You have had such an interesting and diverse career, and I would love for you to, in your own words, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career journey.
Yeah. First of all, again, thanks for having me here today. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone, wherever you are. So I would say when I look back at my career, it actually wasn't always clear what industry or functional area I wanted to go into. But then, as you reflect, right, things become clearer. So I would say, let me just start as I graduated college. It wasn't really clear. And then I tried many things, Allison, believe it or not, I started a company with two of my classmates. And then, I worked in several software companies in Silicon Valley, even had a stint in management consulting. But then I decided I wanted to go back to graduate school. So my undergrad was in engineering. I then decided to go back to grad school for both my engineering master's and also my MBA. And I think it was in grad school, I kind of started to develop a few guiding principles, I would say. Like the first one was I realized, hey, I love this kind of intersection of new technology, and usually new technology enables some kind of new business models. And really, interesting at that intersection of engineering and business. And then the second was that I wanted to work in an area, if possible, that, had that additionality factor. So there is that contribution to society instead of just selling a product. And now fast forward 30 years, 25, 30 years later, looking back, I think I've had the really honor and privilege to really lead and advise at this intersection of innovation, new technology, and business transformation. And I've done it both with more entrepreneurial, smaller venture-backed startups in Silicon Valley, but also in helping big legacy companies like HP and Siemens and even Pacific Gas and Electric, who's a big utility in California, kind of start new businesses. And that's actually how we met because, I was at HP helping them to launch their new 3D printing and digital manufacturing business. But as of last year, Allison, I actually decided to enter, they call it portfolio life full-time. So basically in portfolio life today, I serve on several boards, two public company boards, one private board, and also as an advisor to a venture capital firm. And of course, throughout my career, I also have been very adamant as an advocate to increase the number of women in technology, in engineering, especially at the C-suite and also at the board level.
So I've never heard that term portfolio career. I love it.
Yes.
So that's a new one for me.
That's what people call it. Yeah, I learned it myself too. So portfolio life just means you're no longer in an operating role, but you're still contributing in other capacity. And usually what people do is they serve on boards and they advise companies.
That's an excellent stage of career, especially for someone as experienced as you, and probably some of our listeners as well, who maybe are reaching a more experienced stage of their career where they have tons of great insights that they could be lending to other companies to help them be successful and profitable. So you mentioned that intersection that you experienced personally, intersecting interest, expertise, and lots of different areas as you navigated your journey and your career. And I know that you as well have been encouraging many women to find that common intersectionality of matching that their personal passions with their skills and purpose. And I know years ago, you also wrote an article in Forbes about how women are more likely to stay in technology careers when they feel that they're making a difference. How have you seen this desire and this goal to match meaning and purpose with impact women have on the companies and how they're addressing them?
Yeah, that's another great question. And interestingly, I actually wrote that fourth article about 10 years ago. And when I wrote that, I felt like, it really reflected what I've observed with women in technology, but not necessarily just in the tech sector, but also women in technology who's from automotive industry or from energy industry, and I think it still rings very true today. I found that a lot of us women, I think it's just our nature that sure, we want to advance in our careers and all that, but also we have to balance. A lot of women have to balance between careers and family. And also I think like we're always looking for that extra meaning. And I think that purpose aspect is important because as we all know, careers go up and down. And sometimes when we feel in the long run that whatever we're doing actually is delivering impact, I think that gives us, more kind of like courage and also strength to keep going. And in terms of like how maybe the corporate world is responding to that, I do feel that in today's world, corporations are also trying to balance between the interest of shareholders, which is, in the United States, that is actually the primary kind of fiduciary duties for boards and also for corporations to deliver long-term value for shareholders. But I think a lot of corporations are also realizing that in order to truly navigate like the new challenges and opportunities to create long-term value for shareholders, they also need to kind of take into account the interest of other stakeholders, namely, the customers, the employees, and also the like society, like let's say, climate change, to give you one example. So I think like in today's world, there are even more opportunities for women to actually not just contribute in a sector, but also feel that whatever they're doing is also contributing like positive impact, because a lot of corporations are trying to, again, as I mentioned, balance between, creating long-term shareholders value and taking into account the interests of other stakeholders. And so I think today is actually a very interesting time in our journey, like especially a lot of women who are in the corporate world, that really that intersection is happening.
Yeah, I like that you bring up that whole change in mindset for corporations present day that's been driven by lots of different factors. And I think it's so very true. I think there are so many increased opportunities for women present day because it's not just reaching and meeting those needs and demands of shareholders, but equally important for many companies, as you stated, keeping in mind those other stakeholders like the employees, customers, thinking of sustainability, thinking of impact on environment, all of those important pieces that we know lots of people care about, and many of us and most of us care about. And I think equally, as we look at kind of what people entering the job market are looking for, they're looking for those companies that they're smart-minded and connected to not just kind of hitting wonderful profitability numbers, but equally, how are they impacting the communities where they have facilities and their customers and the like.
Yeah, so, and the beauty of it, Allison, actually the two doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right.
A lot of corporate leaders are realizing that by managing the expectations of stakeholders, they are actually managing material risk and opportunities for long-term shareholder value creation. So, that's the beauty, I think, where we are as a society today, is like the two doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
Right. Which is a good thing. And I think we've seen that duality in so many pieces now change and look lots different than it did many years ago.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So I know that women in technology, I think, has some similar challenges as we experience for women in manufacturing. Too few women at the top in technology firms, too few female leaders in technology, kind of mirroring or similar to the experience of women in manufacturing, which present day, we make up about 30% of the manufacturing workforce. 1 in 4 women in manufacturing are leaders, 1 in 3 are actually women in manufacturing. So I know you're an ardent advocate for increasing the number of women in technology leadership. What's your advice as you look at ways that we can increase the number of women in technology leadership?
Yeah, I would address that question both from the supply side and the demand side. So let's look at the supply side first. So I think it has to start with intellectual capital. So I believe, parents, teachers, society, the community, we need to encourage more girls to study math and science since a young age. I actually read a study not too long ago, Allison, from the Society of Women Engineers. They did a survey. And I guess in grade school, they found that, about 60% of the boys, they said like their favorite subjects in school were math and science, but only about 40% of girls. And so I think from a young age, we need to like encourage girls to study math and science. We need to tell them that, hey, it's cool to be good in math and it's not just for the boys. And then it will go from there, because even today, I would say if you look at the college, if you move from grade school to college and look at the top 5 states in the United States that graduate the most female in engineering or STEM degrees, I think the number is only 20%. So I would say from the supply side, we need to add, more women who actually want to study math and science and engineering. And then I think the other thing is, I think women also need good role models that are good in math and science and can, kind of move up, both the aspirational, so, the CEOs, the founders, the Nobel Prize winners, those are all great, but also the practical, people who are maybe just 2 to 3 steps ahead of you, but are successful as well. You need both because you need the aspirational to see what's possible, but you also need the practical, people that you can talk to, just who are just 2 to 3 steps ahead of you that can really, kind of like help you through your journey. And then last, from the demand side, I think from companies, what I've seen, like things that really work well, is that the companies have to be committed, and intentional in not only hiring female employees, but also more importantly in retaining and creating an environment where they can thrive, where they can be developed. I think, as you mentioned, a lot of women probably they do enter the workforce, but then maybe they don't find the right environment. They don't find the right sponsors in the company, or they don't find the right champions. I think companies need to actually make an effort to really retain and develop these high potential females. And I think that has to start with the right tone at the top. Usually it has to come all the way from the board to like the CEO and the C-suite. And a lot of these development programs has to be integrated, I would have to say, into the overall company's leadership development program instead of, oh, there's the women's program, then it becomes a fringe. So I think all of those things need to be addressed in order for us to continue to increase the number of women in technology, in engineering, in manufacturing, but then also enabling the environment where these women can actually move up.
Yeah, so I think some great advice there on the corporate front of things that companies need to be considering as they're looking at how do we attract more women into whatever their facet of business is. But equally important is how are you supporting those people once you recruit them to your organizations? And as well, how are you developing and enhancing and creating a great experience for them as employees?
Explore new horizons at WiM's annual Summit Conference, taking place on September 25th to the 27th, 2023 in sunny San Diego, California. Hear inspiring keynotes from industrial leaders from Boeing, Clorox, Siemens, and more. Participate in plant tours at leading manufacturing facilities, including Taylor Guitars, Sherwin-Williams, and NASCO. Engage in breakout sessions with expert presenters and network with more than 1,000 of your peers from across the country. Make the most of your summit experience by taking part in volunteer opportunities traveling dinners, and the Horizon 5K. And celebrate women in manufacturing at our annual Hall of Fame Gala on September 26th. Virtual passes are also available. Get the details and register today at womeninmanufacturing.org/summit.
You make it, let EMC protect it. From tailored protection to essential coverages, EMC insurance companies can provide your manufacturing business with the right insurance to keep your operation running smoothly. Plus, with nearly a century of safety experience, we know how to help manufacturers prevent accidents and costly losses. We go beyond the basic loss control survey, working with you to create custom workplace safety plans. And to help keep safety top of mind and at your fingertips, we provide a variety of online tools and on-demand trainings, available whenever you need them. If an accident does occur, we're always ready to respond with local, personalized service to help you recover quickly. From prompt, fair claim settlements to effective return to work strategies, you can count on EMC to help you maximize your uptime. Contact your local independent insurance agent today or visit emcins.com to find out how EMC insurance companies can help you protect your manufacturing business.
So you mentioned now this transition into full-time board service. And I personally am very passionate around achieving more women on boards, both private and public company boards. And as well, of course, still having women involved at all levels of not-for-profit and for other agency boards. There's lots of stereotypes around board service and who's the typical board elected individuals. And people often think it's just the domain of former CEOs or CFOs of public companies. And it's difficult for people to find that pathway as to how to get that first board assignment. And so I'd love to learn more about your board journey. How did you first get onto a board? What was that like for you? And what has your experience been since you've now joined many boards?
Yeah, great question. So Allison, I would have to say probably my first board journey probably started inadvertently in 2017. So at the time I was with Siemens, I was with their new digital energy business. And one day I got a call from one of the major recruiting firms, and they said, hey, there is this, large publicly listed energy company that's looking for a new board member because one of their board members was retiring. I think she was 73 years old. They had an age limit, so they're looking for someone new. But they said they're looking for someone with a new skill set that the person who was departing, because this company at this particular time was very interested in a new board member that can share perspectives with regard to how new technology might affect the transformation of traditional energy company. And they said they've seen some of my work, and that's why they were interested to talk to me. So that first thing was interesting because, to be honest with you, I never really thought about board service that early. Of course, I know, people do, serve on boards after you retire, but, I wasn't thinking of board service at that time. And also, unfortunately, for this particular company, the timing wasn't right for me, and Siemens was a very large supplier. So immediately there's a conflict of interest. And so I just couldn't do it, right? But it was interesting that, I started realizing, maybe these days boards are starting to look for different skill sets compared to in the past. So that was kind of like my first kind of ping with regards to potential board opportunity. And then I moved to HP, where we met. I helped them to launch their new 3D printing business. And then when I was at HP, I got another ping, again, from a recruiting firm. At this time was for a different company. And at this time, it was for Sunrun. And Sunrun is actually the largest consumer solar and battery company in the United States. And same story, they had someone who was retiring. They wanted to get a new board member. But again, in this particular case, they wanted someone who understood kind of like how new technology such as solar and battery would kind of like change our energy system. But I think in terms of Sunrun, they were actually not an unknown to me, Allison, because prior to HP, I was kind of like in the smart energy industry. So I had crossed paths with them a couple of times. So, I was not an unknown to them, and they were not an unknown to me. So I felt this one was like really like a good fit because I understood the industry. They kind of like knew me from the industry. And also I felt like the mission and values of the company was aligned with my own values. And during the interview process, I felt there's a good cultural fit with the current board. And so, I joined that board. That was my first public board. And I was very fortunate that HP let me do that while I was still an executive there. And then about 6 months later, I got another opportunity actually to join my second public board. And at this time, it was with TrueBlue, and they're in the workforce solutions company. And I'll be honest, I don't have any experience in workforce solutions whatsoever. But during the conversation, I learned that they were actually undergoing a large digital transformation journey, in a sense that, their industry needed to modernize how they do business, using new technology. And I felt my perspectives in helping some legacy companies start new businesses, thinking about how new technology can create new business models for them, was a good fit with TrueBlue. And I also felt the mission and values of the company of connecting people to work resonated, and there's a good fit with the current board as well. And that's really like how I kind of like got into board service. But what I want to share with some of the audience maybe who are still a sitting executive, I think it's very important before you join a board to make sure that your company has a policy that will allow you to do that. And I think in my case, HP was okay with that. They made sure there's no conflict of interest, and they let me serve on 2 other public boards.
Great advice, some kind of sound guidance to make sure that there is permission or that you're able to serve on a board and that there is no conflict of interest.
Yes.
And I think also great advice, as you said, how you vetted these opportunities that came your way, making sure there was that cultural fit for you that aligned with, that did match with some expertise and or passion that you had or background in these different areas. So interestingly, I talked to lots of women, female executives in manufacturing who are part of our membership. And many of them have aspirations to futuristically maybe have that next stage or latter stage of their career to be comprised perhaps with 1 or 2 board assignments or opportunities. You mentioned sweet spot. So you kind of know your 2 sweet spot lanes of where you can add value to a company.
Right.
How would you guide other women to find that sweet spot, and how do they share it? I've heard of people sharing their kind of expertise in their bio on LinkedIn, or making sure that they're kind of open to board service on their LinkedIn profile. Any guidance for how people develop their niche or those sweet spots to which of expertise that they could offer to a company?
Yeah, sure. And of course, no one size fits all, because everyone has a different unique value proposition. So I would say my advice would be to look at all the experiences that you've had, depending on, of course, what industry you're in, and then really think about how those experiences can uniquely provide insights and foresights to help companies navigate the next 3, 5 to 10 years. Because as I've mentioned in the past, I think the most sure way to get on a board is actually to be a sitting or former CEOs and CFOs of public companies, because a lot of the work at the board level, when you really think about it, once you're on a board, you're going to be sitting on a committee, right? You're either serving on the audit committees that deal with, financial statements, ensuring the integrity of the financial reporting of the company and managing risk and compliance, or you're going to be sitting on the compensation committee where you determine the CEO compensation and name executive officers compensation and ensuring compensation are aligned with shareholders' interests, but also with the culture that you want to create at the company. Or you sit at the nomination and governance committee where you really make sure that, the board and the company has the right kind of like culture and governance processes and all that to ensure that the company are aligned with creating, again, long-term shareholders value. And these days, depending on who the company is, some companies might have a standing innovation and technology committee, for instance. So those are not, innovation and technology is not one of the standing committees of public companies, but some companies that view innovation and technology as very strategic to where they want to be in order to grow their business, sometimes they do have that standing committee. So I would say as a sitting executive, you should look at your experiences and then really develop a unique point of view as to like how your experiences will contribute insights and foresight to help the company kind of navigate the next challenges and opportunities that might come their way in the next 3, 5 to 10 years. And in terms of like where you should I guess, showcase, some of those knowledge. I would say if you have the opportunity to get published, I think that's a good way to really showcase your knowledge in those areas. And also, like speaking at some of the more kind of like maybe governance related activities. And I think if you have the time also to like publish on your LinkedIn, that can be helpful as well. But of course, if you publish on your LinkedIn, you have to make sure that, like some of the target audience that you want to see your knowledge about that particular subject will actually see it.
Wonderful advice. I never even thought about the encouragement of speaking at events that are governance connected or related to start it, to get found and to promote yourself as a knowledge expert. We talked a little bit about how to get on board. You just gave some great advice as to how to do a self-assessment, where that expertise and skill set might lie for each person personally. What's the experience next step once you get on a board? So you get that opportunity, you're a new director. What is that first few years of experience like as a director? And what would be some guidance you might give about kind of the what to do, what not to do once you get that first position?
Yeah, great question. So it's interesting. Like I joined both my public boards when I was still a sitting executive, Allison. So for me, it was so important. Don't try to manage because truly, I think for those of us who are serving on boards, who are also an executive, we have a tendency to like want to lead, right? Because that's what we've been doing. We've been like leading, growing, all those things, managing. But your role as a board member is not to do that. Like your role is to oversee, to advise, to share insights, to share foresights, but really don't try to like manage management. So I think there is that balance. That's the first thing. And then the second, I would say, really spend time to truly understand the culture of the company. And you can do this in many ways. Again, you want to do it in alignment with management because you never want to go behind their back. You don't want to like step on their toes. But, if they're open to it, take the opportunity to sometimes, do site visits, meet with the teams that are below the top management. One of my boards actually let me even meet customers who really gave me kind of like the opportunity to really learn, how customers are actually viewing the companies and how do employees interact with customers. I think truly spend the time to like understand the culture of the company. And then the last thing I would say is like resist the urge to like want to be disruptive or change things, like I would say listen a lot. And it doesn't mean you should not voice your opinion. I think you should. You should actually challenge management and other board members sometimes from time to time in a respectful way, because you want to maintain a collegial atmosphere, but you also want some kind of creative tension to ensure that there is healthy discussion and debates and there's no groupthink. So those are kind of like the few things that I learned during my first few years as a new board member.
Great guidance. And I think that applies to really, whether it's a public or private board or not-for-profit board that you may serve on. I think great guidance about that kind of role of the board versus the role of staff or management, and as well how to navigate that, because it can sometimes be tricky. And I think as you cited, it's so difficult when you're used to leading and managing teams and taking charge and stepping in more of an advisory role and guidance role is sometimes difficult when you've had that other experience or your other way of behaving is the norm. So
totally. And also, Alison, I would add one thing, at least for me, in the beginning, I felt very uncomfortable with the asymmetry of information because, of course, management had so much more information, much more in depth. And as a board member, especially a new one, there's no way like you will know as deep as they do, but it takes some time for you to feel comfortable that you can ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't think it's a stupid question or anything, because maybe you're asking a question that no one has thought of because, everyone is so involved in it, so they cannot look at it just from a kind of third-party perspective that's fresh.
So as you look at what makes a good board member, are there any specific attributes that you would say a good board member would likely possess, and or success that you've seen in board members? What were some of those things that define them as great board members?
Sure. Okay. So first, let's talk about skill sets. So when you first get on the board, usually, they evaluate you based on a skills matrix, and each board member brings a certain skill set where his or her expertise really lies deep in. Okay. So for instance, these days, I think a lot of boards are thinking, should we get someone who's a cybersecurity expert as a board member? Should we do that? Should we not do that? There's all kinds of debates about that. But my point is, in terms of a skill set, sure, you should have deep knowledge in whatever field your area of expertise is. But also, I think you should be a well-rounded business leader who understands not just your particular area, but also understands strategy, understand, finance, risk, and also understand how these different levers will create long-term value for shareholders. And then from a characteristics perspective, my personal opinion, I think a good board member, of course, you have to have integrity. I think that's table stakes, but also intellectual curiosity and independent thoughts. And intellectual curiosity and independent thoughts are important because, as I've mentioned previously, I think in any board, you do want to maintain a collegial atmosphere, and that happens through, social interactions, respect towards other board members, the way you ask questions. But also, you don't want to be someone who just say yes to everything, right? Like a good board member, I think, challenges management and challenges other thoughts from time to time, have the courage to engage in healthy debates and discussions. And last but not least, can leverage his or her experience into insights and foresights that can help guide the company to manage their material risk and opportunities, again, for long-term value creation.
I like that you mentioned that insights are table stakes. So that alone isn't going to get you to a board, and also not kind of lend, your perfect fit for a corporate board opportunity. I love that intellectual curiosity, encouraging that, as well as it's okay to challenge things and ask pointed questions. And, that's what boards are for, is to help add that extra layer of dissection into the why it's done or how it's done for a company to really look at kind of their future improvement. So I know you recently served on the 2023 National Association of Corporate Directors, NACD's Blue Ribbon Commission on Board Culture. What is your view as to the role of the board in influencing corporate culture, which we know is a big topic presently?
Yes, I do think it's very important because, as we all know, right, Allison, I think there are many studies that have shown that a healthy corporate culture can positively impact the performance, while weak cultures, can have a negative impact potentially. So I think when it comes to board, they do have a role in influencing culture because, first and foremost, they set the right tone at the top. That's what we say. You set the right tone at the top of your organization, and that will then flow into having the right mood in the middle, which hopefully will flow to having the right buzz at the bottom, right? So the board does have that role to set the right tone at the top of the organization. But I think in addition to helping to set the right tone at the top of the organization, I think it's also important for boards to ensure alignment, both among themselves as to what kind of board culture do you want to have, and also alignment with management with regards to what is the company's purpose that you want to have, and ensuring that the company's strategy, culture, and core values are actually aligned to that corporate purpose. And I mentioned that it's also important to have a healthy culture within the board itself. I'm fortunate. I don't think any of my boards are that political, but there are many boards that are political, and sometimes that can negatively affect kind of like the board culture. I think when you're on the board, you should feel comfortable to engage in healthy debates, respect, the diversity of thoughts and experiences, and really challenge, sometimes some of the thinking so that you don't have groupthink. Because what I've seen is sometimes a board can be too collegial, and then they may have some blind spots that they don't see. And then, some like a big risk can happen that they might have not missed if there is a healthy board culture that actually encourages debates and discussion. And then last but not least, we all know that things are changing so rapidly. So I think having this culture of openness is very important these days, because I think that will enable the organization to be much more agile and innovative, and having to kind of deal with all of these unexpected changes that might come to your company.
Great advice. So it has been so great to have a discussion with you today. And as we close each of our episodes of Hear Her Story, we always ask for one final piece of advice from our guest and or for them to share the best piece of advice you've ever received professionally. So would you like to share your best piece of advice that you've received and or just a final closing piece of advice for our listeners?
Yeah, I would say maybe the best, and I'm still working on this, but I really think this piece of advice was really good. Is a long time ago, someone told me, Sonita, don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I think in the past, or even today, I think a lot of us, a lot of women, we're perfectionists, right? We want to wait, we want to analyze, we want to make sure, before we do anything is perfect. But actually, I think that's overrated. I think it is okay to make mistakes as long as you can reflect, and learn from them. Because, I've learned that actually, if you don't make a mistake, that means you're not stretching outside your comfort zones. And that means that you're not growing. So I would say the one advice I would give is just don't be afraid to make mistakes, make your mistakes, learn from it, and then grow from it.
Wonderful guidance. Well, Sonita, again, wonderful to have a conversation with you and wonderful to see you again. We always love celebrating our former Hall of Fame inductees for the Women in Manufacturing Hall of Fame. So great to have the conversation. And thanks for all the great work you're doing to pave the way for more women to, in the future, enter and be on board. So thanks so much.
Oh, thank you so much.
I joined an apprenticeship program instead of jumping right into a job because I wanted to continue my education. In college, I completed 2 certificate programs, and that put me halfway to a degree, and I was looking for a way to finish that degree. And the apprenticeship program gave me that because they pay for my schooling while I'm also working.
Sarah Langvin with Trump is one of the many successful women who have gone through a registered apprenticeship program. These programs are proven to attract and retain a strong, solid workforce.
I would 100% recommend an apprenticeship program to other women. I've met so many amazing people and done so many fantastic things, and it's been very beneficial to start my career in this way.
To find out how you can start a registered apprenticeship program at your company or to join a program, log on to womeninmanufacturing.org, keywords registered apprenticeship programs.
Thank you for listening to Hear Her Story, a podcast produced by the Women in Manufacturing Association. Be sure to share, review, and subscribe to Hear Her Story on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen.